Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm Jose.
And today we're talking about The Passionate Friends.
Yes.
1949 romantic drama, love triangle story, directed by David Lean.
Yes. I've never heard of it.
No, I heard of it a year or two, probably a couple of years ago, because Celia, who's been on the podcast before, who's from Warwick University, told me about it. She's recommended a few films to me over the time I've known her, and very often they go down quite badly, and I just go, I don't know why you like this. She described this to me when she kind of recommended it to me. She said this is one of her favourite films, possibly her favourite. She says alongside a film called Providence as well.
Yes, I know Providence.
Which I didn't like very much. She described this to me as kind of the anti-Brief Encounter. You know, it's like Brief Encounter if they'd got together and had a story to tell, in a way. You know, Brief Encounter is very chaste, and this, although there's not really sex in this, they have an enduring romance that comes back and goes away and comes back, and that's what the story is. It's a long encounter.
It's very derivative of Brief Encounter. There are scenes that are almost identical. Yeah. So the way that the film begins with her on the plane being kind of dreamy, and remembering things. I mean, that's almost identical to the scene with Celia Johnson on the train, kind of dreaming of the life she could have had in Brief Encounter. The scene with her walking in the rain after, when she's emotionally in turmoil in Brief Encounter. There's a scene very similar to that here. The train track and the thought of committing suicide. Here's the tube. So actually kind of, the voiceover. Yeah, there are many things that are
That's why the comparison comes up, I think. That's exactly why. It's not there to say, oh, this is better or worse necessarily, but the way Celia puts it directly, I got her to send me, because she loves this film so much, I got her to send me some thoughts that we could include and kind of discuss. And the first thing she said is, it's what would have happened if she'd actually decided to have the affair with Trevor Howard in Brief Encounter. That's what she liked. She says...
Excuse me.
So...
Well, both films are polite about that, actually, because, this film sets the real love affair in the past, a kind of a brief reignition to it just before the war.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then basically kind of the rest is a misunderstanding. What's really interesting about this film, and really, what convinces me that he's such a great director, David Lean, is what he does with the other stuff. I mean, there are moments of just kind of poetry in this film. So, for example, the scene when she returns to the hotel, it's so beautifully staged. So he's looking at her. She goes like completely wild into the balcony. You're seeing it all through gauze. And basically kind of, you're seeing Claude Rains' point of view on this gauzy, poetic, kind of beautiful image, really, and which you're only kind of seeing partially, right? And then kind of as she comes back, right, kind of it's almost like the shadow coming back into the light, and basically kind of what you see is her tears. And that's the moment where he realizes that she loves him, that this other man is capable of bringing her joy and bringing her pain in a way that he can't, right? And it's also the moment that he realizes he cares too much. He actually loves her, and he knows he loves her because actually knowing that another man can do that to her and not him pains him, right? And just the way that it's filmed, with the gauze, with kind of seeing it through the gauze, with coming out of the light and into, kind of through the gauze into the light. I mean, it's just completely beautiful,
And the way that it's staged as well, so that he's sat behind the door, not like trying to pounce on her or anything. I think he's just sort of sat there, and as she bursts through the door, she doesn't see him. The door obscures him. So there's this dramatic irony in the scene that you've described of him knowing that she's there and is seeing everything, and she not knowing that he's there. And then when she turns around and sees him, that all of a sudden the information is. It becomes very clear that he's seen one thing, she's been doing something else, and like I say, it's not a kind of really a romantic saying goodbye from this couple of days they've had together in Switzerland. But what it is and what it looks like are two very different things, and she immediately knows what it looks like.
Yes. I mean, there were things... I mean, the film begins, and it's already kind of throbbing with emotion. So she's on the plane, and she's so ecstatic to be on the plane. And, of course, it's the post-war, so she's thrilled with just, like, having butter, right, and real coffee, and kind of presumably those things that, you still can't get in England, right? So, so there's, like... Yeah, and then kind of the flashbacks kind of, begin, right? So you start in the clouds, kind of overjoyed, but also kind of with undertow, really. And it's just kind of beautifully staged. I just kind of think, he really is a poet. There's one scene also that really caught my eye where, she's kind of thinking about him, right? And, she's kind of lying on her back. And actually there are like these branches, I think, in the garden, which are just kind of swinging over her face, right? And you could tell that like all her troubled thoughts are just kind of all being expressed through that movement of the shadows of the leaves on her face, right? Which, sounds a bit cliched, but it really works. It's really beautifully done.
Yeah, and I said to you by the end of the film I was really welling up, which I wasn't the first time I watched it. So I don't know what kind of difference is, but I loved it the first time. But I think something that's quite interesting about this is the importance of Claude Rains' character. I think he's a little bit more important than you might expect, and he's treated as more of a person. I think very often in these romantic stories, you want the lovers to come together, and anyone who else, you never think really about external or externalities, negative externalities. You never think about people who might get hurt, and anyone who might get hurt is they just have to, like, the husband has to be out of the way because otherwise the lovers can't come together. It's the most important thing is the lovers come together, and in this, Claude Rains he's cast as a bit of a villain, So when Trevor Howard and Anne Todd are together, and then he shows up, and he'll never show up like in the scene, but you just see him arriving at the hotel, signing in. You see him at the party on an upper floor or something, and once you know that he's present, you kind of feel, oh no, like they're going to have to stop now or something like that, and you kind of feel bad for him, I think, a little bit, but you also understand him. And then at the end, when the divorce kind of proceedings are underway and all this sort of thing, he lets loose at her. She comes to appeal to him, she says, and he lets loose, saying, "I never expected love from you. That's not what this was. I thought this was a successful marriage. I thought we could share the things that I had and we'd be happy together. We'd enjoy them together. But the love that you gave me was the love you give a dog."
Yes.
And he basically screams, "Get out!" And his explosion, you kind of go, he's not a villain in this, he's a real person who deserves things, and what the story really is just about it's about the complications of love and relationships. Things aren't as simple as they should just get together and that'll be that.
Well, what I think that's so clever and unusual about the film is that the adulterous lovers they're like sunshine. So, the Trevor Howard and Anne Todd character, they loved each other before, they love each other now. It's quite uncomplicated. They each know how the other feels about them. They're always happy to see each other, right? Kind of the only problem is that she doesn't want to marry him because she doesn't want that kind of love. She doesn't want to be so involved with somebody. She wants to be independent. And actually, he's got a line where he says, well, that's a recipe for an unhappy life or something.
I think he says, your life will be a failure.
Yeah.
And that's when she goes off to marry Claude Rains.
That's right. So whenever you see them together, there's always that ease, and Claude Rains is represented as a danger, as a threat to, their ease and their happiness, right? And I think the film is so clever because at the end, basically, he's the one who's truly loves and who's truly in pain, who suffers, right? So actually, kind of, the threat or the danger or what could so easily have been a caricature of an evil, wealthy guy, ends up kind of being,
much more nuanced.
Yeah, so, he's a chump, who's fallen in love with someone, who really is only thinking about someone else, right? So you get to see it kind of from his point of view, and you get to see his pain. And that's really lovely to see.
When he's introduced Claude Rains, I think it's a wonderful introduction where he stood up on this balcony while this New Year's party is happening, and he turns round, and it's dramatic, and he's wearing this huge cape like Dracula.
Yes.
Like he starts off immediately as a pantomime villain.
Yes. I think what's amazing about Claude Rains in this film, I mean, he's such a brilliant actor anyway, but he only has 3 scenes, and actually out of those 3 scenes, he steals the movie. There's the scene that you described, the New Year's Eve, but that's really just about looks, right? There's the scene where he catches them, they've claimed to go to the theater and they haven't, and he kind of traps them with dialogue, right, which is very portentous. The way that he says certain words this creates like this whole undertow of kind of what you see. Then there's the scene where he sneers at romantic love. He says, which actually I would like us to tape that and put it on the podcast. It's just, the line reading of that is just brilliant.
Yeah, the line's something like with him it's just romantic love.
Yes,
which is quite a funny line. We both laughed at it.
Yes.
See, if I thought that you and Mary could make any sort of a life together, I might feel very differently about this. But I don't think you could.
How can you possibly judge?
You say you love Mary.
Yes, I always have.
Well, you may love her, but you don't know her. I do. Our marriage has been very successful until now. It's based on freedom and understanding and a very deep affection. It's the marriage Mary and I both wanted. Your love is the romantic kind. The kind that makes big demands. Nearness, belonging, fulfillment, and priority over everything else. That isn't the kind Mary really wants. Although you almost persuaded her that it was.
And it's brilliant the way he says it. So, and then this, the last aria, which is what it is really, where he first tells her to go away, and then kind of breaks down and admits how his feelings for her have been complicated and have changed. I mean, it's just, there are very few scenes really, if you think about them. He's on screen for very little time, but he really becomes the heart of the film. Really, he becomes the core of the film. He's really brilliant.
And he's also a constant presence, even when he's not on screen. I mean, the fact that she's married to him, and that's obviously just that structures kind of everything. It's important.
It is, though. I think the film is so original because actually, what you have are 2 people in love, and they both love each other, and like I said, they're very easy with each other. They feel ideally matched. They like the same books. They like doing the same kind of things. They talk very easily, and they're also passionate about each other. And actually, what's interesting about the film is that that's not good enough. That's not what this woman wants, right? So, some woman's ideal of having it all is not what she wants, And I thought that's kind of like just conceptually such an interesting thing. She wants something else. She doesn't want passion. She wants calmness and coolness and, social position and money, right? And the friendship. She doesn't want messy. Right, and of course, kind of the irony is that it's all messy, really.
Except, on the other hand, she kind of does. She just doesn't necessarily want to admit that to herself. She can't keep away from Trevor Howard.
Yeah.
When he's there, and as you say, whenever they're together, they're always smiling to him. Even when the divorce is happening and his life is being threatened and she's kind of being mentally torn apart, when they meet up in the park, they're still smiling.
Yes. Yes, and and she's still thinking of him and his happiness and his family and what it'll do to him. So it's very selfless in that way, which kind of makes all of it very interesting. I was very fascinated as well by Anna Todd, and by Trevor Howard, because Trevor Howard is incredibly good. He really kind of conveys everything he's meant to, and I'm quite fascinated with him because in some ways he's quite ugly. he's got terrible skin. His face is all pockmarked, and he's got kind of this chin that points inwards. So he's not quite handsome, really, but he's very attractive. Kind of.
He's smooth, and he's polite, and I think it's in the way he acts. Like, you kind of feel like he's the kind of guy who wouldn't ever try and press an advantage, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
He respects distance and that sort of thing, and that just makes you want to draw him closer.
Yeah, he's very good. She's an odd presence because, in some angles she looks quite beautiful, in other angles she doesn't really, right? And kind of, I was thinking it's like a kind of a wonky Garbo or somebody, like, so she's not, she was like an almost Garbo or a wonky Garbo, or you could see the resemblance, right? So that she's quite beautiful, but she's also kind of slightly off, and also actually I think a bit dull, really, within that look, as an actress, right? I mean, I think, in this film, the cinematography and the lighting and, everything does 90% of her job for her, right? So, I mean, she's very effective in it, but it's not necessarily due to her. So that's kind of what's so interesting, because then with Claude Rains, it's like genius, really. Like, every line counts, every look matters, right? Like, it's kind of astonishing in that way. And again, it's kind of looks in conjunction with the camera, so kind of, there are some times where he's so close up to the camera where his face kind of, so he turns sharply to see what's going on. And actually the sharpness is indicated as much by the angle of his face as by his look, so it's just brilliant work.
The very, very end of the film, where he reveals to her, he thinks, but actually to no one, that he loves her, and then goes and chases her. And it's this wonderfully dramatic ending where she's about to throw herself in front of a train, having been told, you treat me like shit, and this is like the end, get out. And then he comes and saves her, and it's properly dramatic, that grab, and then he holds her in his arms. And then the line, this is something that Celia kind of first pointed out to me, and I just completely agree with her. The line where he kind of holds her for a bit, and she kind of calms down, and they sit down on a bench in the underground, and he says, "Shall we go home now?" And she looks up at him and says, "Home?" And he says, "If you want to, that is." There's the way that his face moves. It's so subtle and so minute, but his face kind of breaks into this sympathetic look that just it's the most romantic thing, and I was welling up throughout the entire end. I thought it's just emotionally so raw at the end here, particularly, and I think it's particularly brought on by Claude Rains' character opening up emotionally, that he's been kind of cold throughout and calculating and, like I say, a bit of a villain, and then you think, I'm wrong about him.
The film is so brilliant because the scenes that you've seen before this are almost like heavenly, right? So, they meet by accident in Sweden, they go on a cable car up the mountains, and everything is dream and clouds and whiteness and ease and laughter, right? And they go up, 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 right? Yeah, and then kind of,
in that last scene, it's down,
right?
And I thought exactly the same thing. Down the escalator, down the stairs, down into this tunnel. Yeah. And it is this descent.
Yeah, it's really brilliant. The other thing that I want to comment is that it's a very glamorous film, and actually not what I usually think of when I think of post-war British cinema.
No.
Right, so, the dresses are beautiful. There's a scene where she's running, and just like the movement of her coat from the back is a thing of beauty, right? And she's obviously kind of wearing, like these couture dresses, very striking. The homes are striking. The holiday destinations are striking. It's Switzerland, and the mountains and chalets and cable cars and speedboats, right? It's kind of it's like a glamorous Hollywood film in Britain, really. It has all those production values and, kind of all of those pleasures, which are pleasures of production, really, but also used very expressively in the film. Yeah, so it's not just mere decor, but actually the fact that the decor is so luxurious is a real pleasure to see.
Yeah, and a lot of location shooting in Switzerland in particular, which is just beautiful.
But certainly this is an unorthodox story in the sense that, traditionally the couple would be Trevor Howard and Anna Todd, and you would find a way for them to be together.
Exactly.
Right. And the Claude Rains character would be that which impedes them being together. And actually, the triangle here is very different. What impedes them being together is actually Anna Todd, right? And Todd. So, he loves her, she loves him, but she doesn't want to be with him. She wants another kind of life. So she is what impedes that couple. The threat really is not Claude Rains, right? So kind of that's a very interesting setup, and then to have like a sophisticated relationship where what's important is friendship and trust and companionship and so on, and that again is kind of very interesting to see, in a film of this kind, and particularly the fact that the transformation happens with the male, it's Claude Rains who learns to love. She actually hasn't changed, you feel.
No.
You feel that she still loves, so she's had a happy marriage in her own terms with Claude Rains, right? And she wants it, but she's sorry to lose it. But actually, all her feelings are still for the Trevor Howard character. So that's a kind of a very interesting kind of and unusual and quite remarkable kind of repositioning of like the normal triangle.
Once this film has ended and she's been rescued on the platform and invited back home, the story is far from over. There are other places that this story would go.
Yes.
It's not as simple as,
Yes.
we're done now.
Yes, though maybe that's why the film wasn't a success, because you suspect that Trevor Howard is right. That what's the line that he used? You'll never be at ease with yourself, or you'll
never belong to yourself. So I can't.
Or you'll have a lonely life, or you'll be a failure.
Oh, you're to set up for a life to be a failure. Something like that.
So, and you can see that actually that's probably going to happen. Because Claude Rains now loves her, but actually, if anything, that will make her relationship with him more difficult. When it's two people who just appreciate each other and appreciate the companionship, and but when one ends up loving and the other one doesn't love back, that is in itself a problem, right? So the ending is far from a happy one, and actually you get the feeling that Trevor Howard really has moved on, that he is happy with his family and his wife and his children, and he's happy to see her, and he has happy feelings for her. But, you don't get the feeling that he's ready to give everything up and run off with her now either.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? So you do get the sense that the life...
It's quite
the result of the choices that she's made are not going to be happy ones.
Yeah. It's funny, the thing about failure is funny. There is another line about their marriage being unsuccessful. Claude Rains says it's been very successful. But then, kind of in the context of, he doesn't think of it as romantic. He thinks of it as slightly pragmatic, a relationship of friends and people who can share things.
Yes.
So already there's this idea of success not necessarily having to be romantic success. So again, the kind of the idea that success in this story being the lovers getting together and living happily ever after is not something that this film is about.
Well, I think the film takes Claude Rains' notion of romance at heart. I mean, it does posit that, this wild, passionate, romantic love is not all there is to life. It's not even necessarily a good thing in life. But actually, the film also shows you how it's inescapable, how even the most rational, level-headed person, and against his will, succumbs or is taken over, or is invaded by this passion that he can't control and makes him act kind of against himself in a way. So that's one of the things that's so interesting about the film.
As he does at the end.
Yes.
Yeah. I want to go to a couple of things that Celia said. She didn't. I basically asked her to jot down some notes that might be worth thinking about. So she says, "I like the fact that there's no outright villain." I think we've sort of talked about this. You kind of understand everybody. She says it's very possible to see every side of the triangle sympathetically and to find everyone's motivations reasonable or self-evidently natural, though later the relationship between wife and husband comes to the fore.
Yes, okay.
Nothing's really... I think we've talked about that a bit. She mentions the beauty of the landscape photography, usually ones like meh, and particularly in black and white, but the scenes in Switzerland have such a sense of light, altitude and air to them. The other black and white landscape film I love is Palin Pressburger's Ill Met by Moonlight, which also relies mainly on light to convey the sense of place. I haven't seen Ill Met by Moonlight.
No, I haven't either.
So, sorry Celia, pointless point to make. This is one that I think is really worth bringing up, and I kind of picked up on it while I was watching it, and I mentioned to you one or two things. The choreography, she says, made up of a combination of the blocking of the actors and editing, the scene where the husband is aware of his wife's infidelity. This is the theatre scene.
Yeah.
He's aware of his wife's infidelity, but toys with her and her lover before revealing what he knows is exquisite. I can't really fully break it apart, though I've tried too many times. It's utterly perfect, like a piece of precision watchmaking. A mechanism that operates very precisely, where you physically see the shift in the balance of emotional power or who has the upper hand. So it starts with the agonising dramatic irony of you knowing that he knows about the affair, but them not knowing that he knows. Close in on his face, then him moving back, her moving forward, then close in on her face when she knows he knows, which is when she sees the leaflet that he's put down, the programme from the theatre. So he's gone to the theatre to see they weren't there. Although the lover still doesn't know, and then this ballet which physically moves them about back and forth in depth within the frame as shifting points in a literal triangle. Dance is the closest analogue, but this is like an emotional dance.
Yes. Oh, that's a very good way of putting it. Except that there's also his line readings on top of that. I mean, though I think they work in
combination. They work like what you're saying about his line readings is absolutely right, but they work in combination with his. But it's quite a theatrical thing that the character is doing. Leaving the program where he knows it will be seen by her but not by him. Well, and then saying things with double meanings.
There are several things here. So first of all, just the beauty of the setup, because it's a very simple setup. And actually, I remember at this point telling you, my God, isn't it interesting how very few things you need to make something so tense, right? It's just a differential of knowledges. We know that he knows, right? Yeah. So kind of the situation when they arrive is already charged. Then he's left out the little program so that, she'll come across it, but you don't know when she's going to hit it, right? Then actually he puts a drink on top of it so she can't miss it, right? Yeah, and then so we know, he knows, she knows, but now the other guy doesn't know. Yeah, so it's very simple. The situation alone is one that kind of creates all of this tension. So that's the first thing, it's just the situation. Then the way that it's pictured for us, right? So kind of, what Celia was describing there about kind of, the camera movement and kind of, the foregrounding of her, and then the responses, and what she mentioned about like kind of like this triangle. And then on top of that, really, there's the actors themselves. And foremost amongst them, because he's really controlling that scene, is
Claude
Rains. Right? So all of those elements are kind of just, brilliantly put together. It's kind of, it's genius cinema, actually.
Yeah, and it's a combination of all of that staging and performance, but also the script. Everything's very cleverly organised to, so... first it's the tickets have been left. Well, first it's I'm going off to the theatre with Stephen. Oh, you haven't seen Stephen in a while. Oh, have you seen much of him? No, I haven't. And of course, that she has.
Yes.
And then Claude Rains at home with his secretary. The tickets have been left behind. Would you just call the theatre and see, And then he goes to the theatre, sees they're not there. So it's one thing after another to give characters information, to give and then what it ultimately does is give him power in the scene, as Celia says, and kind of status and the ability to manipulate the situation to I'd say toy with them. I'd like to say when we talk about there being no clear villain, I do think still that I think for a long time you are supposed to really think of him in that way, not as an outright villain, but having some kind of villainous tendencies or villainous abilities, and being the obstacle to,
you think
to
about
that relationship.
you think about him that way only until the moment where they've agreed to run off together and she decides to stay with him. You know, and then actually I think my feelings at any rate changed, because then I thought, well, the villain is really her. You know, kind of, she's stowing both of this older man who offers her security and this younger man who truly loves her, you know. And yeah, she's kind of promised one thing and done another, and basically kind of sold out for money and richness. And, you know, that you also get the sense it's really also her own self-protection. But there's this beautiful shot afterwards, which again I thought, you know, my God, isn't Lean brilliant? Because it's so simple. So, you know, he's been kicked out of the house, and so you see him from this high angle shot looking down, and it's almost like he's plastered against the sidewalk, right? And then kind of there's a reverse shot, and this time, you know, the camera is at eye level, or just below eye level, and you see him kind of looking at the house where things are going on that now he can't have access to. And actually it's just lovely, you know. And it's a way of giving him sympathy. You know, he's the one who's defeated and longing, right? And that is really just done through the angles. It's really beautiful.
Yeah, it's the eye-line match of looking up at the house and back at him and up at the house. Yeah. I think there's also some... There are a couple of kind of cinematic flourishes or kind of excursions which I think are interesting. Like the scene in which Claude Rains imagines the worst in the chalet, when he sees he's up in the room and Todd is waving Trevor Howard off at the boat.
Yes.
Again, you knowing that nothing has happened really between them, they just have this picnic. But he sees them. He's only just turned up there. He's imagining the worst, and the camera gets very close up to his face, as we mentioned, and he kind of turns dramatically, and his eyebrows are kind of contorted in this kind of imagining and thinking, and then it cuts in on a shot of Trevor Howard and Todd kissing passionately, and then cuts away again, this kind of the wildness of those things kind of intruding on him. And then there's another imagined bit where it's just prior to that, when the two of them are having the picnic, and they've already talked on the cable car on the way up about, oh, you've got a family, how old's the kids, all this sort of thing, like establishing really that they are having separate lives, you know. And then while he's setting up the picnic, she's sat on a rock on her own and imagines that cable car trip again. And she says, you know, when did you get married? Which is the line that she said. And he goes, married? I could marry no one but you. And they kiss. And it's just one shot of just this kind of, this slightly alternate version of what might have happened, which I think is wonderful, and kind of jumps in there. I think you kind of don't quite expect that. And
well, just to add, because the scene that you were describing when, you know, because, so again, it's beautifully done in this, it's almost like a MacGuffin. He's got, you know, he's sitting with his secretary, he's got these binoculars, right, and they're coming on the boat. And so, you know, you immediately have this tension, will he see them coming on the boat? And then there's all this play. He picks up the binoculars, but he looks at something else, and then he puts them down, and then, you know, the secretary's anxious because she knows that they're coming, right? So actually it's just a lovely, again, that's just kind of, the writing is, you know, is lovely because it creates all that tension. That's all the tension of the situation. But then actually, when he's in the room and he looks over the balcony and they're saying goodbye, I actually don't think that the kiss is a passionate one. You know, I think his suitcase has gone down and she kisses him goodbye, and, you know, she's waiting.
No, he doesn't see the kiss. He imagines a kiss. That's what's happening in that sequence. Because there's another shot that cuts in of the secretary walking away from the table, and again it's like the usual suspects going, oh, that's what was really happening. He's imagining something much worse than was happening, but the kiss that he imagines between the two, between Anton.
Well, we should see that again, because my feeling was, you know, that they kissed and they actually kiss in the mouth, but it's not a passionate kiss. It's a goodbye kiss.
I'm happy to cue it up again.
Yeah, let's look at it.
I'll pause this here and then we'll come back. Okay, so we've just stopped the podcast and to go and look at that scene again.
Yes.
Come back. So what we've seen is there are two kisses shown. One is the real kiss.
Yeah.
As Claude Rains sees it from up on his balcony, a very long way away, and it's just a little kiss on the mouth.
That's right.
And as you say, it's a goodbye kiss.
Yeah.
And then the music comes in, dramatic music of him imagining, and then he imagines a much more passionate kiss between the two of them.
Well, he imagines all kinds of things. So, he imagines that they've actually been having a passionate kiss, that all the hotel staff is laughing at him, that the secretary's in the know and anxious, right? So
he gets the feeling of everybody's in on it.
So this is just kind of the director showing us his interiority, what's going on in his mind, right? Which is different than what he's seen and what we've been shown him seeing. And the point that I wanted to make is that, so he's seen just a normal goodbye kiss. He's imagined all these terrible things. But actually the moment that really destroys him is the moment where she walks into the room, panting, excited, waving goodbye wildly to the man she clearly still loves. And then when she turns around, she walks in the shadows and is revealed to be in tears over her loss. And the loss is him. It's Trevor Howard. It's not. So her experiencing this joy and sorrow at another man is what really destroys Claude Rains. That's the point I wanted to make. Yeah.
And the other kind of cinematic sort of flary excursion that I wanted to bring up was the one in which, it's just after this in fact, where he immediately he looks at her and leaves, and then immediately divorce papers come up.
Yes.
And there's this montage of shots of telegraph wires.
Yes.
And things like this, and trains, and there's a lot of voiceover, and it's not like, I mean, it's the sound of people in kind of telephone exchanges and things, and it's saying, can you find Trevor Howard? Where is he? Oh, he's staying here. Is he? And you catch things like he's staying in Geneva, but the image that goes along with that is a train going to Paris. So she's kind of one step behind as she tries to warn him. And eventually catches up with him in Paris, but again she's kind of too late because the guy is there with the divorce thing, so she couldn't get there in time, and she has to hide. And I think that's a wonderful sequence, and again it kind of comes up from out of nowhere. It's a much more active sequence, kind of visually, and it's a little bit different from what we've seen in the rest of the film, and it completely conveys sort of the all of a sudden it's like the film has sort of gone, okay, well the story's gone here, so I have to show it the way it's supposed to be shown, but it's like you're kind of chasing the story visually. It's interesting.
Yes. I mean, I think I didn't like the music. It's like overly underlining everything.
I love that.
Yeah, well, I found it too much and too heavy, and at moments it came across as really just too loud, like extraordinarily loud. So I think that could have been done better.
But then on the other hand, like when you get to the final scene, in fact, at the most dramatic points here, I think, maybe other than that, the one we just went back and visited, the imagining scene, I don't think there's any music. In the final scene at the train station, in the kind of scene where he catches them in the affair.
I don't remember very clearly, but the music is loud and excessive throughout the film, except, and actually you can tell how loud and excessive it is, because there are moments where the director turns off the music completely, and actually the lack of music acts as an emphasis to the emotion.
And there are also times when the characters have to shout over the music, which I like. So right at the start in that party scene, they're saying, "Well, I see you tonight. Where am I going to see you?" And they don't communicate with each other over the volume. There's another point where that happens. I can't remember exactly when, which I kind of like.
Well, I mean, I liked it, and I particularly liked the jazzy bits where they're dancing together and they've got the phonograph on. But the extra diegetic music is really, I found, too much.
Fair enough. I want to bring one more thing, and this is something that Celia brings up. My friend and I have talked about whether or not this is a feminist film. Does Anne Todd have agency in her life? So is the scene where Rains invites her to come home and says, "If you want to, that is," respecting her agency as a woman to choose for herself how her life is going to be, are they now in a relationship of equals, or is the way that he says it more paternalistic? Is he treating her as a child at that moment and only offering the illusion of free will?
Well,
I'm on the feminist side, she says. My friend is on the non-feminist side. I think this is very much a story about her emotional life above all.
oh, well, no. I mean, I think the last line, or the way that I understood the line, is if you want to be speaking in security about whether he is lovable enough or worth loving enough for her to want to return. I think, that line is, about him as much as it is about her. I think, the feminist angle is clearly one that's been worked into the film, but basically it's an illusory one. As far as we know, she's got no money and she's got no position. It all stems from him. And as we're shown, he can give it or he can take it away, right? So the only safety or action that she has is to choose not to abandon herself to feeling and love, which actually, if that's a feminist choice, it's a very poor choice. It's a very kind of poor set of choices to offer.
Yeah, she does still kind of find herself in a difficult position. I think it is a romantic ending. He comes to admit to himself more than anything that he loves her.
It's a romantic ending from his point of view.
Yes, and I think it is offered to us as such, and that's why he goes to rescue her. And it's supposed to be a romantic kind of rescue and sort of admission or reconciliation, that sort of thing.
Yes,
at the end.
But
you're right that she doesn't really have an awful lot of choice as to what she does. She is still kind of at his, not his beck and call, but as you say, like the only choice she really has is whether to leave to nothing or not.
She's now lost Trevor, right? And she's now on the verge of losing the security, position, friendship, etc. that she once had with him.
Yeah, so that's why she goes down to the train station and wants to kill herself. She's got both.
So the option then is to kill herself or to accept Claude. So I don't see how that's a feminist.
Yeah. No, I think that's it's interesting. So I think that because I do find it romantic that he kind of embraces her and takes her into his arms and comforts her and says, "Do you want to come home?" And you're right, that is kind of from his side that it's romantic, and
that's one of the things that makes the film interesting.
Yeah,
because it's all focused on her feeling, and her feeling for Trevor Howard, and then Trevor Howard's feelings for her, and so on. But actually, what it ends up with is Claude Rains discovering feeling and being overwhelmed and overtaken by it, which I think is lovely. So here's this man who had given up on that, who didn't want that, who was too rational, and who was kind of focused on social position, the finer things in life and achieving success, and who wants a companion to live that life with him and share in it, but all of a sudden kind of overtaken with, feeling and emotion.
Yeah. And you're right, kind of the idea of although it's not that useful to speculate, but the idea of what happens next in the story is an interesting one, because you now end up in a situation, you think, where he loves her, she doesn't love him, she never has. He's rescued her from suicide, and you kind of feel there's an obligation, or not an obligation not the right word, but a kind of gratitude or thankfulness or some responsibility to be grateful for that from her. But yet it's not like she can give him what he's now giving to her, this love, because she still doesn't feel that. And then there's the added thing of that she relies on him for safety, money, security, all the rest of that. So you end up with a very difficult situation between the two of them now. I think it's wonderful, and I think it's more wonderful now than when I first saw it. I think, I think it's... I mean, I really didn't like Brief Encounter when I saw that.
Oh, Brief Encounter is wonderful.
And, I'm sure that on second viewing I would like that more. But maybe I didn't get it or something, I don't know. But I think there's a relative complexity. There's certainly a structural relative complexity in this, with the flashback informing things and going back into the present day eventually. and I think the way it's structured is useful. I don't think it's not the same story if it's told chronologically. And I think the way in which Anne Todd, it's about her memories, you know, and she is kind of caught between the memories of this love that she had and where she is now in her life. And that's what I think that structuring kind of privileges and emphasises and brings in. Because as you say, like, Trevor Howard's character is much more ready to give up the possibility of relationship with her, and by the time that he's got married and had kids, you're absolutely certain that that's what he's done, and she can't.
The thing about the Trevor Howard character is he's been courting her for 10 years, including X numbers where he's already married to the other guy. So actually, as soon as she turns him down for the second, as soon as basically he's committed adultery with her, you know, on the basis that she really loves him and she's ready to run off with him. And then when she backtracks on that, then I think that's the end of it for him. Right? And what's interesting is it's not the end of it for her. But I want to mention a point because, you know, you were talking about a Brief Encounter. This film should have paid a royalty to Noel Coward because really the script borrows so many elements. It's not even funny, right? So, you know, the voice, I've mentioned some of them before, the voiceover, you know, one a scene on a train, the other one a scene of a plane. But then all of those, you know, the romantic incursion, having a day out, they go to the theater, the other ones go to the cinema in Brief Encounter, right? They're, kind of the outing over the bridge.
Suicide by train.
Yeah, I mean, there's, you know, it's almost like a checklist of things that they've copied. It's really uncanny. And actually, it
is based on a novel by H.G. Wells. And I don't know, I've never read the novel, and I have no idea kind of how closely it adheres to the novel. But I don't know to a precise extent kind of what might be drawn from that or not. But certainly in the light of Brief Encounter, you're right that like these things are, some things are quite identical.
I mean, I'm just sorry that when I taught Brief Encounter that I hadn't seen this film because, you know, I would certainly have brought it into play earlier. Anyway, we should wrap up.
I think it's a really, really brilliant, wonderful, heartfelt film. And, you know, I was surprised to find myself kind of welling up as much as I did.
Yes, you were blubber at the end.
And properly tearing up right then. And because, you know, I think it's somehow under the surface, like these things are in English film at the time somehow. They always feel like everyone's kind of prim and proper and saying, oh yes, oh darling, oh how are you? And yet it's that masks real depth of feeling.
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
As opposed to like, you know, If Beale Street Could Talk, where it's just screaming feeling at you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And yet somehow the effect on me is the same.
Yes. No, it has that kind of... it has wonderful restraint. And also it has undertow, right? So, you know, this notion that people say one thing but they're really meaning another, right? So kind of they're playing text against subtext, or, you know, the surface over what's underneath and putting it into play at all times. I mean, again, we talked about the scene where they discover the tickets, but that whole scene is about that, right? About kind of saying one thing, meaning another, and so on. So, it's kind of... It's wonderful, though I also understand why it wasn't a success.
Yeah, well, to be fair, I don't have any information on... I had information on its critical reception at the time. The BFI had a page on it. As far as kind of financial box office says, I have no idea.
Well,
but, critically, it seemed to have been received with some mixed... let me just get up what the BFI said, actually. Give me one moment, please. This is on BFI Screen Online. It says... The Passionate Friends provoked mixed reactions from critics who welcomed an adult love story but were frustrated by what they saw as Lean's refusal to tell that story straightforwardly. The Evening Standard described the film as, quote, such a wild melee of retrospection and reminiscence that it would appear to be shot with a time machine instead of a camera. So they're talking about the structure there, particular, the flashback structure, I think.
The reason why I think it couldn't be a hit, or was the ending, you know, because whilst it's wonderful, it's also against audience expectations. So, you know, she doesn't end up with her true love. The lovers don't end up together. You know, the person who ends up being true and in his feelings is actually the one that you expected to be the villain. And at the end, you have like this, this woman who's meant to be extraordinarily beautiful, kind of ending up with a man she doesn't really love. So that's not the recipe for a happy,
the course of true love never did run smooth, as did the course of just kind of convenient love.
So
it's a complicated thing, but I think that that's why it's good.
Yeah, no, I think it's great.
It's audiences are dumb.
Yeah. But anyway, so let's wrap it up.
Yes.
Thank you very much for listening. We are eavesdropping at the movies.
We're on SoundCloud, iTunes, YouTube.
Yes.
Facebook and Twitter.
Yes.
And eavesdroppingatthemovies.com is the website.
And apologies to those of you who've been leaving comments on the YouTube thing, because we suddenly realized that there are some of these that nobody's listened to on YouTube, and then there are others that have thousands of hits and several comments, and we just kind of didn't realize that they were there, so we haven't responded, but we will be checking in more thoroughly in the future. So thank you very much for posting them. We do appreciate them.
Yes.
Goodbye.
Cheerio.